Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, August 27th, 2021. Ready for another show. The household is in disarray. The Dems here are in disarray as we watch the Here Comes the Bus app. Haven't got the bus routes down just yet, but it doesn't matter anyway because the braces are really hurting and something's loose and there's some wires sticking out, so we got to get to the orthodontist. But luckily we're covered with that ride for today, so we can go on with the show. But lots going on. I am now anticipating the next big mistake that we make in the show. Won't happen today because I caught it in time, thankfully. But obsessively watching the Here Comes the Bus app leads me to forget to turn on all the alarms for all the brakes. I remembered that last second, so I think we'll be okay today. Hopefully the alarm is set correctly and the volume is down low, so it won't be too bothersome when it finally does go off. I got to find a way to arrange things on my desk last minute so that everything is ready to roll. This alarm might reverberate off of these papers or something. We'll see how it goes. All right, how are things going in your corner of the world? If you're in Afghanistan, are you in line at the airport yet? Make sure you get there. Things in disarray there, obviously, today. And went the worst possible way yesterday, although I don't know. I don't think that they really didn't anticipate something like this, but of course, a terrorist attack at the airport targeting the, I guess, both people leaving and the military personnel, U.S. military personnel facilitating those evacuations. And it's a confusing and complicated situation. Several U.S. service members killed, so tragically lost there. And of course, Republicans making full use of it, doubling the contributions of the terrorists overseas with a matching grant for every contribution. That is to say, instead of condemning the attack and bolstering the administration and bolstering the operation to get people out of Afghanistan, we've moved out, over 100,000 now, and they're moving something in the neighborhood of 10,000 a day. A remarkable effort where American service members have now sacrificed their lives in order to facilitate the effort. The call from Republican circles was for the immediate resignation / impeachment / 25th Amendment removal of Joe Biden for having facilitated the removal of 100,000 plus people from Afghanistan and still going, at least until next Tuesday, the 31st. So, who knows, maybe beyond, but so far they're trying to hold firm to that line. Will this change anything? I don't know, but I'm glad the fifth columnists decided to double the impact of the terrorist attack by guaranteeing them that if they pull something like that, they would foment social unrest in the United States, and that if they, now they've gotten the signal, if they bomb enough, I guess they might assume that there would be an uprising against Biden, which, I think fairly seriously misreads everything and perhaps betrays a misunderstanding of what's going on in the United States. But that's probably not also their primary goal. They may actually be quite attuned to American politics, and they were just surprised to find the additional bonus of Republicans attacking Biden as a result of their terrorist attack. But I guess we shall see. All right. I found a couple of interesting articles about what's going on in Afghanistan. It's probably catch up for anybody who actually knows what's going on. But if you do, then you're probably on television somewhere and not listening to the radio show. Plenty of other things to cover as well, as Bill reminds us from Portland, Maine, with his morning tweet. Kagro in the Morning Show, live now. And Kagro X, me, David Waldman, says it's Friday, and I do. So far, check. Well, others disagree. That's the problem. And we'll have to leave it there, mainly because our horse deworming pills are kicking in and gotta run. Yeah, by the way, I'm learning a little bit more about how ivermectin is administered. And I guess it comes in several forms, but I guess the one they most frequently sell at some of these farm supply stores is a paste of some kind. Sounds really delicious. And I think it's like apple flavored, and you're supposed to fool the horse into thinking it's getting a treat, and maybe it's perfectly happy to get it if it's got worms. I don't know. Not sure what the horse thinks when this is going on, but they're probably annoyed that there's a shortage of ivermectin and angry at the people who are poisoning themselves with it instead of giving it to them. All right. I did put aside a couple of interesting articles, as I mentioned, about Afghanistan, one of which is a Wall Street Journal article. Sometimes we don't actually get to have access to those. They promise access, and then access is cut off. You get to look at it once. I'm just curious to see whether it will serve it up, but it looked so important that I actually ruined my morning trying to get things ready by using my one available access to the story to cut and paste it in pieces, because of course all the graphics and pictures are in the way, and various captions and advertisements, etc., and painstakingly cut and paste it into an email to myself so that I could have the text. So screw you, Wall Street Journal firewall. That's how we got around it. But it really looked like a pretty serious and important and interesting piece. I don't know how accurate. We'll have to assess it. I've never been to Afghanistan. But I spent a good part of the morning just sort of reading up on the various people, players, regions, regional leaders, regional warlords, whatever you want to call them, trying to figure out who's doing what and what's happening where, and it's impossible to catch up, but another one of those days where I just spent time clicking through various Wikipedia links to the descriptions of different people, some of whom are long gone, but whose name still carries weight in certain regions. There are various regions of Afghanistan not yet under the control of the Taliban, and I was reading about some of that, and it sounds like that's about to change, but it's interesting to read about the various areas that have put up resistance and who the leaders there are and what their history has been. And some of these people have been literally fighting constantly since 1975 or so. Apparently, there's a good number of them who were, at the time, probably all students together. I don't know if they knew one another. And who later led different factions. Sometimes they started out in the same faction and split, but that starting in the mid-'70s, there were various Islamist uprisings against the Soviet-backed communist government there, and then even against the interim government once the Soviet-backed communist government fell. And of course, they've run through more than their share of governments, but some of these folks have been involved in war on an ongoing basis for, I guess going on 40 years here, and maybe more. And I guess, I don't know, I bring that up to help illustrate the point that's been made a couple of times over the last few days of not likely that the United States is going to be able to bring this to an end with some minimal contingent of troops. And it's sometimes argued that we could at least have enforced the stalemate there, but I don't think so. They've been at war and fighting and biding their time for a very, very long time. And I don't think that I think they view the United States as a short-term player in all this, and that they can wait us out. And they can, because they're home. And it's a question of how long do we want to stay away from home in order to fight this war. But on a different note, a different angle of this Wall Street Journal piece, I guess, calls into question the provenance of yesterday's terrorist attack, I guess. And I guess to that end, maybe I should take a look for something that will summarize the aftermath of yesterday's attacks. I as I recall, I had seen something in the neighborhood of 15 or so American troops killed in all this. I'll just turn over to yesterday evening's news roundup from Hunter over at Daily Cosign to see if we can get the numbers here. Leading the news today, as he wrote it up in his summary, a suicide bombing at a checkpoint outside the Kabul airport has killed at least 60 people, including 13 American military members. So numbers much higher than just military losses, obviously. Military evacuation efforts, though, will continue. There's new movement in the push to learn the full extent of the Trump White House's involvement in a seditious attempt to nullify an American election. That's good on the news front, too. I guess we could use Hunter's news roundup as a guide, given that we don't have Greg's roundup instead this morning. Now I'm just sort of interesting. And a new lawsuit against Trump from some of the Capitol police officers who defended lawmakers that day. So that sounds interesting. Also, probably a good thing to do, we should see if we can catch up with Armando at some point. The federal judiciary is meddling all over the place and coming up with some, from what I gather, rather absurd rulings with, well, no basis in law or precedent whatsoever that have turned many of the common sense approaches to, well, the pandemic and other things completely upside down in the last couple of days. And it's becoming increasingly obvious that it's all, ends-based activist judiciary work from the 6 conservatives on the court, and it's breaking down 6-3 over and over again. And again, things that are on the conservative wish list, but that had no real basis in law, but they simply have put together a Supreme Court majority that says it doesn't matter anymore. And, well, they're delivering on all the threats that we have anticipated coming down the road, one after the other. So we'll catch up on some of those things. But as I was saying, there's some question about what to do and how to react and who to blame for the bombing yesterday. And, of course, again, leave it to Republicans to give you the worst possible reaction. At least one member of Congress, I guess I can scroll back in my feed to see if I can figure out who it was, that just basically, the reaction you would expect from children to say, well, we should put more military in there and bomb everybody and make them pay and kill some bad guys. I mean, that was literally the strategy that was being laid out, at least by some of the Republicans who, were foolish enough to speak up about this. Let's see. I think I'll scroll back a little further. I'm pretty sure I'll find it. But it calls into question, well, let's say your strategy made any sense. Who would you be targeting in all this? Yeah, here we go. I found the tweet from Andrew Solander, a Forbes reporter, who spoke to Republican Representative Mark Green, not Marjorie Trader Green, but just the 2 E's and no E on the end, Mark Green. And his big strategy is, I'd put more military in there, I'd get every single American out, and I'd start killing bad guys. That is in a Fox interview. What a genius plan. I'm surprised nobody else thought of this one. And we'll get right on it, right after we take it one day at a time and tell everybody that we're just happy to be here and have the opportunity and all glory to God, or whatever other platitudes we might want to add and all this. That's the big game plan. That was my comment on it, right? What should we do, Coach? Get in there and score some points. And while you're at it, prevent the other guys from scoring some points. And try your best to have more points than the other team when this whole thing, whatever it is, comes to an end. That's a great plan. The question is, if you took it seriously at all, right, let's say you put more military in there. Let's say you got all the Americans out. Let's say you got the opportunity to, quote, start killing bad guys. Who are the bad guys? It's not always easy to tell. Or do you care? I mean, that's a problem. Can't really conduct the war very well that way, but that's kind of the way we've done it everywhere. Kill them all, let God sort them out sort of approach. So who perpetrated this bombing? ISIS apparently has taken responsibility for it. I don't know if I didn't even get to the chance to look this morning. Is there anybody else claiming responsibility for it? Because that's the sort of thing that sometimes they all race to claim responsibility for, and it's not entirely clear whether they really had responsibility for it. But I think it was probably the assumption of people like Mark Green that it was the Taliban, because that's what I've been reading these last couple of days. Our problem is the Taliban, but it could be someone else. There's every reason to believe that the Taliban would like to see this evacuation completed more or less without bloodshed. To their eyes, I mean, there are certainly some people that they would probably want to capture and punish for their role in supporting the American occupation in Afghanistan over the last couple of years. But on the other hand, there's probably another faction that says these are the troublemakers and people who are going to get in our way or who could constitute a resistance once we finalize our control of the country and the Americans are gone. And having them out of our hair is probably not such a bad thing, especially if it all takes place at American expense and we don't waste any bullets doing it. So it's not entirely clear what they benefit from setting off a bomb like that. But I guess it's not entirely clear to us because we don't always understand what they're doing. So I'm not 100% sure that it was ISIS. And is ISIS active there? We were, of course, promised by Donald Trump that they were 100% defeated. They've defeated 100% of them. We wiped them off the map. But here they are. And where do they stand, and what's their relationship with the Taliban? Do they cooperate? I'm sure a lot of people would figure maybe they do, because they seem to have similar goals and in some cases similar methods. But that's where this Wall Street Journal article appeared to be so interesting to me. Inside the hidden war between the Taliban and ISIS. And you have to know that basically I guess if there are two players, are the Taliban and ISIS, and you say, you know, they have some commonalities. Can't they all just get along? Well, again, I remind you, we're talking about the Taliban and ISIS, and they don't really do the get along thing. You know what I mean? So I wasn't terribly surprised to see this headline, but I was terribly surprised to see the Wall Street Journal allowing me to read it. So I dove in. The subheader here says the group took aim at the Islamic State offshoot, earning it some support from world capitals. That would be the Taliban. The Kabul airport bombings raised the specter of a longer, bloodier battle. And that seems obvious. Alan Cullison. It looked like Allison because of the last name. But it's Alan Cullison responsible for this article, published yesterday, and I've got it right now, and I have to read it from my email, though, but I'll begin from the Wall Street Journal page. 2 days before he was shot dead by the Taliban, Abu Omar Khorassani, the one-time leader of the Islamic State in Afghanistan, sat slumped in a dingy Afghan prison interview room waiting for his soon-to-be executioners. And I mean, I guess that kind of answers the question. We'll read the rest of the article, but the former leader of the Afghan presence of ISIS. Remember, of course, ISIS, the second IS is Islamic State in Syria. This isn't Syria, it's Afghanistan. For a while we had the ISIL, right? Islamic State in the Levant. There's an Islamic State in the Arabian Peninsula. There's an Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula. Everybody's got operations all over the place. Now there's an Islamic State in Afghanistan. And how did they get along? He was in a prison, and then he got executed by the Taliban. Mr. Khorassani saw the Taliban's advance as a harbinger for change. Change. Hope and change. For years, both organizations had sworn to rid Afghanistan of non-believers. So why can't they all get along, right? They will let me free if they are good Muslims, he told the Wall Street Journal in an interview. When Taliban fighters seized Kabul last week, they took control of the prison, freed hundreds of inmates, and killed Mr. Khorassani and 8 other members of his terror group. That is an unexpected twist. All right, now I have to switch over to my email in order to read the rest of it. Just as the Taliban has been fighting American coalition forces in Afghanistan, it has been waging a separate but parallel war against its rival Islamist group. Remember, of course, these are warlord factions, and apparently in the offing is control of the entire country. And that appears to be falling into Taliban hands. They're probably not interested in any power sharing agreement, even if they agree in some cases or in some ways of applying Islamic law, perhaps, with ISIS or its offshoot in Afghanistan. Why share power? I guess that's the bottom line. So let's see, where were they? The Taliban assisted at times, but, I think I might have skipped a little bit here. On one side are the Taliban, who have co-opted remnants of Al-Qaeda. Remember, the whole thing for the United States, or this whole round of the United States interventionism, started, of course, after 9/11, and it was determined that the Taliban, because of their ties in, Islamism and their various extremist views, were willing hosts to Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda operatives and training camps, etc. That's how they got themselves invaded by the United States post 9/11 in the first place. So I guess it wouldn't come as very much of a surprise if it wasn't even necessarily just a power sharing or an aversion to power sharing that drove a war between the Taliban and ISIS, but experience. Like, we tried the get along thing and it got us invaded. And we were actually doing pretty good vis-a-vis the United States prior to 9/11 in 2001, even though we were training Al-Qaeda. They just weren't doing anything about it. But the cooperate with fellow Islamist militants thing kind of backfired for us. So maybe we don't want to do that anymore. That could be what's driving it. Well, we'll read on and find out. So on the one side of this war, Taliban, who have co-opted remnants of Al-Qaeda. On the other is the Afghan arm of Islamic State, known as ISIS-K. I think that might be our line for it. ISIS-K, which has sought to incorporate parts of Afghanistan into a broader caliphate emanating from the Middle East. The caliphate that was 100% destroyed by Trump. And it really did seem to have been more or less marginalized, if not erased. The Taliban, assisted at times by other countries and U.S. coalition forces, that's Taliban assisted by U.S. coalition forces from time to time, were the winner in that effort. And I think probably as between the two of them, we might have selected the Taliban after all. That's according to defense officials. ISIS-K has been driven from its enclaves in Afghanistan and its fighters dispersed into hiding. And you can really hide in Afghanistan, it turns out. Anyway, there appeared to be little resistance as the Taliban swept across the country this month in the wake of the U.S. withdrawal. On Thursday, in a reminder that the battle remains bloody, 2 explosions ripped through the crowds surrounding Kabul airport, where the Taliban and U.S. forces have been providing security to foreigners and locals seeking to flee. Right? So, important point in there. The Taliban helping out with the evacuation to an extent. I mean, happy to see their troublemakers go, so taking it for what it's worth. At least 90 Afghans, really, and 13 U.S. service members were killed, the Pentagon said. U.S. officials attributed the attacks to Islamic State's regional affiliate. Islamic State itself claimed responsibility in a report posted by its Amaq news agency, AMAQ. It has a news agency, everybody. I mean, didn't they have a hotel at some point? Wow, they really are. They're not far removed from Trump, are they? He has a hotel. The continued presence of Islamic State in Afghanistan is one reason the Taliban could receive international support from countries, including the U.S., that view Islamic State as a profound threat. And it is. Russia, China, and Iran say they see the Taliban as a mainstay of stability in Afghanistan. Well, okay, that's Russia, China, and Iran. a reason they plan to keep their Kabul embassies open after the U.S. withdrawal. We have a different view. During a news conference after Thursday's attack, Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie, commander of U.S. Central Command, said the U.S. was relying on the Taliban to screen Afghans as they approached the airport. We used the Taliban as a tool to protect us as much as possible, he said. And I think you have to read that carefully. Not that they used them as much as possible, but as much as it's possible, we used them for some protection, I think is probably what he meant. And that caused some outrage yesterday, too, just because you can see that it would be an operational security problem at some level, but what else are you going to do? The Republicans and the alarmist media played this as, can you believe it? Look how stupid we are. The United States security forces there, the military forces, gave a list of names to the Taliban of the people that they were looking to evacuate. Well, the people they're looking to evacuate are, generally speaking, said to be those who would find their lives in danger for having cooperated with United States forces during our occupation. And that the Taliban would be interested in rooting them out and punishing them, possibly killing them for that role. So what would we possibly be doing? Giving them a list of those people. Then they would be able to go hunt them down and kill them. But remember, what's actually happening here is those people are trying to get through the barricades at the perimeter of the Kabul airport, which is largely being guarded by the Taliban themselves. And so essentially what they were doing was basically like giving them a list. If many of these people come to the walls looking to get into the airport, we are actually interested in evacuating them. If you let them through, we'll take them out of your hands and out of your hair if you'll let us. And that's what the list was all about, but of course it got portrayed upside down and backwards because there were points to be scored. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio, and welcome back to Afghanistan as we read about the ongoing war, the conflict, the tensions, the murders between the Taliban and ISIS in Afghanistan, or ISIS-K as they're calling it here. I don't know what the K exactly is all about, but maybe it had to do with Khorassani, who was the leader. I have no idea. Probably not what they're calling themselves. But at any rate, interesting to note the tensions between the groups rather than the assumed cooperation, I think. It would be a mistake, really. I guess if you're looking to make your first step, I think, towards understanding what's going on there, assuming that there's cooperation going on between Islamic militants is probably, at first blush to the American eye, a good idea, but I think with a little bit of study, not a particularly good one. Not a lot of people among the absolutist wing getting along with one another because they're absolutists. Each one of them thinks they can take singular control of Afghanistan. Why cooperate with anyone? So anyway, yes, the strange mini outrage that, has a germ of truth to it, but in the big picture probably doesn't look all that damning, of the circulation of lists of people to admit to the Kabul airport for evacuation. In that context, we left off in this article when Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie was saying that they were relying on the Taliban to screen Afghans as they approached the airport, and that we used the Taliban as a tool to protect us as much as possible, I guess rather closer to insofar as it is possible, might have been the meaning there. When the U.S. invaded Afghanistan in the wake of the September 11th attacks, the Taliban had few allies. The organization was reviled in the West for hosting al-Qaeda terrorists and opposed to regional powers, including Russia and Iran. Not such a bad situation, from our point of view in terms of this is pretty good to have, we don't get along with these people. We never will, but they are actual opponents to the Russians and the Iranians operating in this area. Maybe it's not such a bad idea to keep them around. But then the al-Qaeda complication, which, could lead you to believe that the Taliban lesson from all of that was, let's just be the best Taliban we can be and not rely on various Islamic extremist groups that we might have agreement with for support and mutual aid. Anyway, behind the appearance of solidarity between the Taliban and al-Qaeda was an uneasy relationship, with many Taliban resenting Osama bin Laden for using the country as an operating base starting in the late 1990s. A computer recovered by the Wall Street Journal, really, in Kabul after the Taliban were ousted in 2001, showed that al-Qaeda members often looked down on their Afghan allies as illiterate and incapable of understanding the Quran. Members of the Taliban, in turn, blamed some in al-Qaeda for exacerbating problems with the West and contributing to their country's isolation. And goodness, you could believe that pretty easily. The September 11th attacks created new fissures as leaders in both organizations were forced into hiding. Taliban founder Mullah Omar didn't appear to know about the attacks in advance. You didn't give me a heads up, some ally you are. And his relationship with bin Laden was chilly while both were in hiding in Pakistan, according to Ann Stenerson, an academic researcher of Islamism and author of the book Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Sounds important. After U.S. forces killed bin Laden in 2011, mind you, that's 10 years later, documents recovered from his Pakistan hideout suggest scant contact between the al-Qaeda leader and Omar, she said. What were they going to talk about? Doesn't it suck that we're both in exile? To which Mullah Omar would probably say, I'm in exile. You don't belong in Afghanistan. You're from Saudi Arabia. It sucks probably for you that you're in exile from Saudi Arabia, or maybe you like it, but it sucks for me. I wish you were in Saudi Arabia. While the Taliban took years to regroup after 2011, al-Qaeda launched the first successful attacks on U.S. troops in the eastern province of Ghazni in 2004 using improvised explosive devices, said one former Taliban commander who fought U.S. and government troops there. By 2009, the groups began to merge their commands, usually with al-Qaeda members embedded alongside Taliban fighter groups, the former commander said. The combined forces of the two groups waged a terror campaign against the U.S.-backed government and coalition forces through hit-and-run attacks, bombings, and targeted assassinations. So, a marriage of convenience for a little while the country was being invaded and occupied. The dynamic shifted as al-Qaeda sought a lower profile. And Islamic State rose in prominence in 2015, so here come the new guys. The new group seized territory in Syria and Iraq and invited fighters to join to create a province of Khorasan, a historical region encompassing parts of Afghanistan, Iran, and former Soviet states of Central Asia. The group found devotees among disaffected Taliban, because there's got to be some of those, right, and militants from Central and South Asia, some of whom volunteered for service in Syria and Iraq. Two Islamic State enclaves appeared inside Afghanistan itself. I didn't realize there were two. One in the eastern province of Nangarhar, maybe, and another in the northern province of Jawzan. I'm sure I'm butchering this, but what can you do? The arrivals weren't welcomed by the Taliban, which viewed Islamic State as an impediment. Islamic State had more ambitious global goals, while the Taliban sought to regain control of Afghanistan and had no interest in helping Islamist groups outside the country, said Mr. Khorassani in interviews conducted shortly before his death. I would assume so. The interviews from after his death are probably fruitless. The leadership of Daesh is independent. The goals of Daesh are independent, Mr. Khorassani said. Remember when we were told that that was a sort of a pejorative term for ISIS? I don't know whether that was correct or whether they're just owning it here or what. Anyway, that's what Khorassani said, using an alternative name for Islamic State. That would be one that makes sense to him in his native language, I guess. We have a global agenda, and so when people ask who can really represent Islam and the whole Islamic community, of course, we're more attractive. Well, that's the sort of thing that's going to make the Taliban upset and jealous. Other nations began to view the Taliban as a potential bulwark against Islamic State's global ambitions. There was a huge concern about it, and suddenly there was a desire to find some common ground with the Taliban, said Bruce Hoffman, director of security studies at Georgetown University. People began saying maybe they were a group we could reason with. And that, I think, gives some important background and context to the otherwise inexplicable and stupid-looking negotiations that the Trump administration conducted with the Taliban. I mean, there was possibly some real productive value to talking to them at the time. The problem was that we sent the Trump administration to do it. I now see here, by the way, a comment from John Godin tweeting to us, as JNG tweets, saying, I think the K stands for Khorasan province. Very likely the case, although I don't know if anybody has an actual Khorasan province, but they clearly viewed the area they were hoping to dominate as the historical Khorasan, which, to no one's surprise, I don't know whether it's his actual name or whether he adopted the name, but the leadership of this faction calling himself Khorasani, which perhaps was more aspirational than actually reflective of his birth name, but I don't know. It may have been the case that it was both, and he may have become interested in the historical province of Khorasan because of the name and thought it made good sense. Okay. So, with that not cleared up but out of the way, we return to the text of the article, which was where? I scrolled back a little bit to double check on some of the facts here. Okay. Right. Other nations began to view the Taliban as a potential bulwark against Islamic State. There was huge concern about it, and suddenly there was a desire to find common ground with the Taliban, right? Thanks to Bruce Hoffman, director of security studies at Georgetown University. Maybe we could reason with them after all. Russia, which still officially classifies the Taliban as a terrorist organization, opened negotiations with the group more than 5 years ago, according to Ivan Safranchuk, a Central Asia expert and professor at Moscow State University. The rise of Islamic State in Afghanistan became a motive to go big with these contacts, he said. Not very descriptive, but interesting. The U.S. has accused Russia of providing arms to the Taliban, an allegation that Russia denies. Iran has also provided arms, according to U.S. intelligence. China separately hosted a high-level Taliban delegation as recently as this year. Mr. Khorassani said he joined ISIS-K when it opened a chapter. That's what it says. Opened a chapter in Afghanistan. He rose to be regional governor, its then highest-ranking member, overseeing South Asia and the Far East. Similar to Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, the group in Afghanistan became infamous for grisly execution videos, attacks on civilian targets, and use of extreme violence against newly conquered locals who opposed their rule. In Narangar, where Mr. Khorassani served as governor, officially, unofficially, I don't know, the group executed village elders and locals by seating them blindfolded on a pile of explosives on a hillside, which it detonated. So fun. The group later circulated a video recording of the execution. That will endear you to the local population. Which, I guess, by the way, I mean, you know, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if there's any way to endear yourself to the local population. So, I mean, it may be that we spent 20 years saying we meant to do that, but in fact killing a lot of the local population as well. But they were blowing them up on purpose and putting it on videotape. And I guess neither one of us endeared ourselves to the local population, but we're leaving and they're staying. So I guess, you know, in terms of why didn't our plan to win over the hearts and minds of the local population work? Well, I don't know if anything was going to, but killing a bunch of people and then just taking over, if it's something that you can do, I guess that works better than trying to win hearts and minds along the way. But you shouldn't do it, and I wish we weren't. And we haven't resorted to it the way ISIS-K has. I can't endorse that, but it seems, I don't know, it seems to be, if you're willing to get killed in the process, more effective, and we're just supposedly not willing to sit there and get killed. I don't know what to make of this. This is a mess. So anyway, Mr. Khorassani, of course, says those executed in the video were criminals. I guess everybody else says they were village elders. But to people who are looking to take over, like filibusteros, that's the same thing, I guess. You're just a local person who opposes us. Well, opposing us is criminal. Therefore, you're a criminal. Therefore, we execute you. Khorassani said attacks by Islamic State often benefited the Taliban, despite the enmity between the two groups. He noted that a prison break in Jalalabad last year, organized by Islamic State and involving 4 suicide bombers and 11 gunmen, set free hundreds of prisoners from both the Taliban and Islamic State. A showdown between the Taliban and Islamic State took place in Jawzjan. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but what do you think? Jowzjan. Jawzjan? In 2017. So this is now a showdown between the two groups. After this, according to Khorassani, after a commander with Taliban ties and his fighters swore allegiance to Islamic State founder Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, they were joined by a militant Uzbek group called the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan. Together, they seized 2 valleys of the province and raised Islamic State flags over their statelet, Mr. Khorassani said. The fighting that he described corresponds with U.S. accounts of the battles in which the forces of the U.S., the Afghan government, and the Taliban crushed Islamic State militants over the course of several months. Hundreds of Islamic State militants surrendered to government forces the following year. In Nangarhar, Islamic State was similarly ground down by attacks by the U.S., Afghan government, and the Taliban, Mr. Khorassani said. The U.S. dropped what is known as the mother of all bombs, or MOAB, right? The most powerful conventional bomb in the U.S. military arsenal to wipe out a Soviet-era cave complex controlled by Islamic State militants. Everyone supported the Taliban one way or another against us, Mr. Khorassani said. It's no secret why they began to win. Okay, that explains it. And by the way, just like Trump, also a persecution complex. He may be right in all of this, but let's see. They owned a hotel, and they have a news agency, and he's got a serious persecution complex and says everybody's against me. So there's a lot to it. On the other hand, Khorassani was executed. Trump has not been executed to this point. Just pointing that out for you. So the similarity ends there. Don't know whether that's going to hold, but probably. We don't do that in this country. Anyway, so that's interesting. That's his explanation for, well, of course the Taliban won. Everybody supported them, and everybody hated us. I wonder if it had anything to do with blowing up village elders or killing entire villages or making the war about our global ambitions instead of what's going on locally. The U.S. said at the time that it killed more than 90 militants, including several commanders, in the bombing of the cave complex. Mr. Khorassani disputed that, saying the complex was evacuated at the time. The rise of Islamic State as a new international enemy furthered the Taliban's global diplomatic efforts, boosting a group that for years had sought to scrub itself of a terrorist taint, according to former officials of the U.S.-backed Afghan government. The U.S. offered the Taliban international recognition by opening negotiations in Doha that led to the release last year of 5,000 inmates from Afghan prisons. Many of those former detainees flocked to the battlefield, strengthening Taliban forces, former Afghan government officials said. As part of the agreement reached in Doha, the Taliban promised to prevent militant groups from attacking the West. Mr. Khorassani said he left Narangul last year as the remnants of Islamic State fighters dispersed inside Afghanistan. He was arrested by U.S. and Afghan forces in a house outside Kabul in May of 2020. A judge sentenced him to death and 800 years in prison, both. But the Taliban got to him first, and they sentenced him to 800 plus years of death. So, pretty, one way or the other, somebody was going to kill him, and I guess he knew it. It's just sort of interesting to realize the factions there. Just as we sort of woke up at some point to, early on, late in the game, I'm sure, from the perspective of the people involved in the Middle East, but it took America quite a while to wake up, or the American public a while to wake up to the differences between Sunni and Shia Islam and the tensions between the two, and the unlikelihood, for instance, of an Iranian alliance with ISIS being militant Sunnis and therefore in large part anti-Shia, and of course Iran being dominated by Shia Muslims as opposed to Sunni Muslims, and that these tensions between them. Okay, so we begin to see that there's a real reason why you shouldn't suspect that there was cooperation between these two groups going on. Similarly, although it appears that the Taliban, I'm getting the sense, although it's not mentioned in this article, and I don't know where I have seen it, but it seems like the Taliban are themselves Sunni practitioners as opposed to Shia practitioners. So I guess you would have some question about how much involvement they'd have with Iranian forces, but that would explain the initial reluctance to deal with Iran, even though Iran is the regional power there. And then, of course, the reluctance to deal with Russia having been a previous occupying power. It becomes a little easier to see the Taliban as as probably how they see themselves, as an independence movement inside of Afghanistan. But if the independence movement is killing your soldiers, we tend not to describe them that way. It's not in the American character to describe ourselves as occupying forces fighting independence movements locally because of our own creation myth. And I don't know, even if it turns out to be true. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting and good background and good information to have as we struggle to try and understand what's going on there and who might have been responsible for the bombing and why would one group do it and the other group oppose it, or were they winking at it the whole time? I don't know. Impossible to tell, but at least there's some more information. All right, let's see. Other fun items that might uplift you on a Friday. I mentioned to you that the Supreme Court has handed down a couple of rulings lately that have been roundly condemned by various legal analysts with whom we are loosely affiliated, in some cases more closely affiliated. I took AP's report of the latest one, Feds, this actually a backgrounder piece for the other one I grabbed from Bloomberg News. Let me start with this one. Supreme Court scraps Biden's eviction protection for tenants. That mentioned in Hunter's roundup of the news from last night over at Daily Kos. Greg Stohr, S-T-O-H-R, writing this piece yesterday, kind of giving us a background of what's going on, updated early this morning. A divided U.S. Supreme Court lifted the Biden administration's moratorium on evictions, ending protections for millions of people who have fallen behind on their rent during the COVID-19 pandemic. Saying landlords were suffering irreparable harm, the conservative-controlled court ruled late Thursday that the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention lacked authority to impose the moratorium under the decades-old federal law that the agency was invoking. The decision comes amid a spike of COVID cases around the country and, of course, a year and a half into a pandemic that sparked the moratorium in the first place. So, I don't really know the ins and outs of the ruling here, although it would occur to me in the beginning that, I'd be interested in checking what was the authority and how strong was the authority for the CDC to have imposed an eviction moratorium. That might be something I could see the CDC recommending, saying as a public health measure, it really would be best to make sure people aren't unhoused during this when we're asking people to isolate at home, and that it's extraordinarily important to the public health that people do that. We really shouldn't be interrupting their ability to do that if they, through eviction, especially if you can also point out, they're unable to work to earn the money that would otherwise be used to avoid eviction because the businesses they worked in were closed because of the pandemic. So it made a certain amount of sense for the CDC to want that to happen. I was surprised, actually, in reading up on this to find out that it was CDC authority that they were leaning on and all this, and it would be pretty easy to imagine conservative judges coming to the conclusion that the authority didn't exist. But furthermore, I think coming to the conclusion that you couldn't simply transfer the authority somewhere else where it might belong retroactively. And so they're going to wipe this thing out. And of course, I'll save the other article for later. But reminder here, it is landlords saying that they are suffering irreparable harm by being prohibited from evicting people so that they could, I guess, replace them with tenants who can pay rent. Although it's not entirely clear that it's the eviction moratorium that is causing the suffering. They could probably make a pretty decent argument that you could evict people, but getting other paying tenants in who can pay long term, given the instability in the employment market because of the pandemic, not at all a sure thing that relief can be found by ending the eviction moratorium either. Not to mention the fact that there was federal assistance made available through the states, thanks block grants, to assist landlords. It was contemplated that they would be losing income in all of this, and the federal government provided some sort of relief, and apparently, according to this other article I put aside, some 89% of the federal rental assistance distributed to the states hasn't been distributed. And a more liberal court might have said, I understand your point. You definitely are suffering irreparable harm, but the people you need to be complaining to are the state governments that aren't giving you the federal dollars that they got for this purpose, not individual tenants and throwing them out. Well, anyway, I'll continue with the Bloomberg article here. As I said, they were claiming to suffer irreparable harm. Now, a comment on it here from the court. It would be one thing if Congress had specifically authorized the action that the CDC has taken, but that has not happened. The court said in an unsigned opinion, it strains credulity. It's always a good sign that something stupid is coming after this, but it strains credulity to believe that this statute grants the CDC the sweeping authority that it asserts. The White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, said the administration was disappointed with the decision, crediting the CDC's eviction moratorium with saving lives. As a result of this ruling, families will face the painful impact of evictions, and communities across the country will face greater risk of exposure to COVID-19, Psaki said in a statement on Thursday night. Liberal Justices Stephen Breyer, Elena Kagan, and Sonia Sotomayor dissented, faulting the court for deciding the issue without full briefing and argument. The public interest strongly favors respecting the CDC's judgment at this moment, when over 90% of counties are experiencing high transmission rates. Breyer wrote for the group. That figure is the highest it's been since at least last winter. By the way, the other, it's mentioned here in promoting a different article from Bloomberg, the other recent decision in which the court rejected the Biden administration position out of hand was insisting that the Trump stay in Mexico asylum rule be reinstated. Another decision that was not only troublesome, but apparently, more or less without grounds. But anyway, I guess we'll turn to that at some later date. Before our top of the hour break, we'll read a little bit more of the Bloomberg piece here. The court had left intact the previous CDC moratorium in June, but Justice Brett Kavanaugh, can't believe he's a justice, but he is, said at the time that congressional authorization would be required for any further extension. So, making that point clear, Congress didn't act, however, and progressives instead pressured President Joe Biden to issue a new, slightly narrower moratorium. The ban applied in counties with substantial or high rates of community transmission of the coronavirus, but currently more than 95% of the country. It was a good premise, but yeah, really Congress had to act, and, well, they just didn't. But I don't know if they anticipated the lightning speed with which the Supreme Court moved to pounce on this opportunity to end the moratorium. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Little fight with the mute button there, but I won in the end. They're like ISIS M. ISIS of the mute button, and I don't know. Anyway, back to the court cases that we were focusing on. Justice Department lawyers argued that the Delta variant of the virus had heightened the importance of the eviction ban, and it has, to ensure that a wave of people aren't forced into more crowded accommodations, or none at all for that matter. In announcing the revised moratorium on August 3rd, Biden acknowledged the legal odds were long, but he said the ban was worth pursuing in part because the litigation would give local governments additional time to distribute more than $45 billion in rental assistance that Congress had granted. The challengers, a group of landlords and real estate trade associations from Alabama and Georgia, where all the good sense is being made these days, said Biden's remarks showed the administration was flouting the rule of law. Oh no, I hope that doesn't happen. And I hope that those guys aren't now totally opposed to flouting the rule of law, because wait till I tell Donald Trump about that. He'll be so pissed about the last 4 years. The Treasury Department said Wednesday that only $1.7 billion in rental assistance was released last month, bringing the total so far to $5.1 billion. Representative Cori Bush, a first-term Missouri Democrat who camped out on the Capitol steps to protest the July 31st expiration of the previous moratorium, called on Congress to act. We already know who is going to bear the brunt of this disastrous decision: black and brown communities, especially black women, Bush said in a statement. Maxine Waters, who chairs the House Financial Services Committee, said she would immediately set to work on a legislative solution to address issues with the slow implementation of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. My new proposal would ensure that both renters and landlords can independently apply for emergency rental assistance so that landlords get paid their back rent and that the program works with less bureaucracy and red tape, Waters said in a statement issued after the ruling. The administration has been relying on a legal provision that authorizes the Secretary of Health and Human Services to make and enforce such regulations as, in his judgment, are necessary to prevent the introduction, transmission, or spread of communicable diseases. The CDC is housed within the Health and Human Services Department. The case is Alabama Association of Realtors versus the Department of Health and Human Services. And, well, now we know the outcome. So, yeah, I guess it was a little bit shaky. It sounds to me like the story was, there's the authorization, right? There was legislation that said the Secretary of Health and Human Services can make and enforce such regulations as in his judgment are necessary to prevent the introduction, transmission, and spread of communicable diseases. And they said, all right, one of the things that will, we think, prevent the introduction, transmission, or spread of communicable diseases is an eviction ban. And, you know, that's far afield from the usual place where the Health and Human Services Department and or the CDC would be exercising their power. It might have helped, though, if the government had been able to say, well, it's true that it's an unusual application but of their powers. But remember that the complaint here is that the landlords are suffering irreparable harm. And the irreparable harm is that they're losing money, which isn't really irreparable harm, by the way. And also, there's government authorization for paying them directly to alleviate that harm. So it's not irreparable. There's actually money appropriated for helping them with it. It's taking longer than it should to get it to them. But again, if the claim's irreparable harm and the action from the court is premised on the idea that the harm is irreparable and it's not, then maybe you shouldn't take that action. It's a fairly coherent argument, really, in my view. Now, on that rental assistance, I had the AP article that I that I opened first. Feds report most rental assistance has still not gone out. Michael Casey reporting for AP yesterday. States and localities have only distributed 11% of the tens of billions of dollars in federal rental assistance, the Treasury Department said on Wednesday. The latest sign the program is struggling to reach the millions of tenants at risk of eviction. The latest data shows that the pace of distribution increased in July over June and that nearly 1 million households have been helped. But with the Supreme Court considering a challenge to the federal eviction moratorium, and they're done considering it now, the concern is that a wave of evictions will happen before much of the assistance has been distributed. Some 3.5 million people in the U.S. as of August 16th said they face eviction in the next 2 months, according to the U.S. Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey. I guess for that reason it was the Biden administration faced with this lawsuit and the inability of Congress to act, at least before they took their recess, was really something of a disgrace in the face of this challenge. But maybe they thought that the Supreme Court wouldn't take this thing up and move quite so quickly. It sounds like the administration's plan was, well, it's shaky. It's difficult to believe that particularly this conservative Supreme Court would allow HHS this sort of power, but let's do it and they can take us to court. And during the time that this thing is pending in court, maybe the money will finally start to flow to these landlords and the irreparable harm will start to be fixed and they'll drop the case. You know, that's the only thing we have. It's either that or do nothing at this point. So they took the long shot. But I mean, I think everybody probably could have predicted, well, what would landlords do? Why, they would probably pursue the case, win the case, and then take the money on top of it all. And they'd actually be entitled to it, perhaps, at some level. And if all this money is for back rent, well, okay, that makes us whole. But we still have a tenant who has no demonstrated ability to pay and hasn't been able to pay for months. We've been made whole for that, but what's going to make us whole going forward? Nothing. So you're out. And we'll try to find somebody else to rent to. Now, back to the AP article. Lawmakers approved $46.5 billion in rental assistance earlier this year, and most states are distributing the first tranche, as we like to say, of $25 billion According to the Treasury Department, $5.1 billion in emergency rental assistance has been distributed by states and localities through July, up from $3 billion at the end of June and only $1.5 billion by May 31st. Several states, including Virginia and Texas. Greg always says, we love Virginia, right? Doesn't say that as much about Texas, but we love you too. Anyway, not your governor, but several states, including Virginia and Texas, have been praised for moving quickly to get the federal money out. But many others have still only distributed a small percentage of the rental help. Housing advocates blame the slow rollout partly on the Treasury Department under President Donald Trump, which they say was to explain how the money could be spent. The criteria, while clearer under the Biden administration, was still criticized for a burdensome process that seemed more focused on preventing fraud than helping tenants. Again, always the fear of fraud. Advocates also said states made things worse. Some waited months to set up programs and others created bureaucratic hurdles. But remember, block granting all that money is so much more efficient. Remember when that was the excuse? Efforts to use coronavirus relief money for rental assistance last year faced similar challenges. Nearly 1 million households assisted is meaningful progress, but the overall rate of spending emergency rental assistance remains much too slow, said Diane Yentl, CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Some communities are spending the money quickly and well, proving that it's possible and making the many communities who aren't all the more glaring and unacceptable, she said. 7 months after funds were first allocated to them, 9 states have spent less than 3% of the money, and 16 states have spent less than 5%. National Apartment Association President and CEO Bob Pinnegar called the assistance rollout a disaster, marred with programmatic inefficiencies and difficulties. Americans are hurting, and we are on the edge of another financial cliff as distribution deadlines loom and the future availability of rental assistance funds is jeopardized, he said. The Treasury Department has repeatedly tweaked its guidance to encourage states and local governments to streamline the distribution of funds. The Biden administration has also asked states to create eviction diversion programs that aim to resolve disputes before they reach the courts. On Wednesday, Treasury released additional guidance to try to speed up the process. This includes programs to allow tenants to self-assess their income and risk of becoming homeless, among other criteria. Many states and localities, fearing fraud, have measures in place that can take weeks to verify an applicant qualifies for help. It's interesting. I wonder how concerned they'll be about fraud when it is landlords, and in particularly institutional landlords, who can apply directly for this help. And I wonder whether it's limited to tenants doing the applications as a way of hoping to avoid more of the fraud. I don't know if it just engenders its own type of fraud or whether it does help but just slows the process down. Treasury also said states and localities now can distribute money in advance to landlords and utility providers in anticipation of the full satisfaction of the application and documentation requirement, and they approved providing money for tenants who have outstanding rental debt in collection, which would make it easier for them to find new housing. For those cities and states that wanted even more clarity that they can and should use simpler applications, speedier processes, and a self-attestation option without needless delays, this answers that call, said Gene Sperling, who is charged with overseeing implementation of President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus rescue package. The guidance could not be more clear. Oh, dear. And there's no room for more clarity? The guidance could not be more clear in expressing that this is a public health and eviction emergency that requires putting quick and sound rental relief above unnecessary paperwork that will not reach families in time. The administration also announced measures aimed at averting evictions at federally backed housing, including 400,000 rental units in Department of Agriculture-backed multifamily properties. It also is offering additional rental assistance to at-risk veterans and their families, and working to ensure tenants in public housing can access rental assistance. So that's where that particular case stands, and that's the backstory of the failure to distribute all of these funds quickly enough to make an impact. To throw things back briefly to Afghanistan, just for a moment, and I guess to play off of the reminder that we're constantly fretting about possible fraud for various reasons, and mostly because Republicans imagine ways to defraud some particular program and then just assume that everybody is defrauding the program in that particular way, even if they're usually the drivers of these frauds. But one of the frauds that they apparently feared in Afghanistan in the evacuation process is that, well, the Taliban, who are the bad guys because reasons and are obviously terrorists, even though, they probably don't meet the traditional international operating definition of terrorists, that makes them just plain old freedom fighters if they're only bombing in their own country in order to, well, you get the idea. But they're pretty sure that Taliban operatives, because they're bad guys, were disguising themselves as refugees and getting on the planes, and are going to come to America and bomb the United States when we evacuate people here, even though most of the people being evacuated don't immediately end up here. You get the idea. Speculative at best, not really particularly what most Taliban operatives would be interested in doing, according to our understanding of this, but who knows? It could be somebody else, and that's another of the dangers. Is that, an ISIS person could do that, and then they would have come from Afghanistan. Bomb goes off somewhere that we don't, want it to go off. And that's most places, unless we're dropping them. And you would say, well, look at the guy. He's dressed like one of those Taliban guys. It must be the Taliban, even if it's somebody that they consider themselves to be at war with. Anyway, I brought all of that up by way of transitioning to the idea that there aren't a lot of voluntary refugees, who don't, that is to say, who would prefer being a migrant, a refugee, being resettled in another country, to just plain living in peace and getting a job and hanging out in their own country. That's not something that's going on. But I'm sure Republicans imagine that it is, that whether the migrants are coming from Central America or the Middle East, that, I'll just, claim to have been victimized and claim that my life is in danger and use it for a free ticket to the United States because it's awesome to do that. It's not particularly awesome. And you don't, and you don't leave behind, danger and poor health and poverty for a land of milk and honey where the streets are paved with gold, after all. Even though, again, that's part of our creation myth, and maybe that's why Republicans think people might do that. This particular story doesn't even involve ending up in the United States. It involves an Afghan refugee who ends up in Germany, but in many cases, you probably actually, get treated better landing in some other countries, including Germany, than you do here in the United States because we're so anti-immigrant. There's plenty of anti-immigrant people in Germany and across Europe as well, but the social welfare programs are much more open to them than ours are because we're so afraid of fraud. Anyway, here's what actually happens, I guess. In Reuters, the headline kind of tells the story, which I guess is the purpose of a good headline. The Afghan minister, that is to say government minister, who became a bicycle courier in Germany, and not because he loves bikes either. Leon Malherbe and Riham Al-Kusa are the reporters here whose names I butchered. Dateline, Leipzig, Germany. Syed Sadat. That's a name from Blast from the Past, Sadat, but 2 A's in this Sadat, or 3 A's in Sadat, S-A-D-A-A-T. Syed Sadat used to be the communications minister in the Afghan government before moving to Germany last December, it's a while ago, in the hopes of a better future, which, that's what they're seeking, certainly. And he didn't, I guess, leave as an emergency refugee the way people are leaving now from Kabul airport, but a more of a planned exit. But even when it's more of a planned exit, what's awaiting you, right? Now he is a delivery man in the eastern city of Leipzig. That's the deal, basically. From government minister to whatever you can get. And that's a better life. I mean, it is. But think about what people are doing here. It's not like they're simply saying, well, I'll be a doctor in the U.S. too. No, it doesn't always work that way. Anyway, he said some at home criticized him for taking such a job after having served in the government for 2 years, leaving office in 2018. But for him now, a job is a job. I have nothing to feel guilty about, the 49-year-old British-Afghan dual citizen said, standing in his orange uniform next to his bike. He had quit the Afghan government because of disagreements with members of the president's circle, he said. I hope other politicians also follow the same path, working with the public rather than just hiding. That's a good point, too. P.S. Note for the record here, he is a British-Afghan dual citizen, but didn't go to Britain. Interestingly, he went to Germany. And I wonder whether that has anything to do with well, thank God I'm a British-Afghan dual citizen. I can leave the country a little more easily, perhaps. But geez, Brexit, do I really want to land in Britain? Well, maybe not. Let's try Germany. Anyway, his story has gained particular prominence with the chaos unfolding at home after the Taliban takeover. Family and friends of his also want to leave, hoping to join, the thousands of others on evacuation flights or trying to find other routes out. With the withdrawal of U.S. troops on the horizon, the number of Afghan asylum seekers in Germany has risen since the beginning of the year, jumping by more than 130%. Data from the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees showed. Even though his dual citizenship meant he could have chosen to move to Britain, where he had spent much of his life, he relocated to Germany at the end of 2020, seizing his last opportunity to do so before that path was closed by Britain's exit from the European Union. Wow, Brexit, such a success. By the way, one thing we haven't had time to touch on is I keep hearing anecdotal reports of various materials and consumer goods shortages cropping up in Britain, blamed on Brexit hiccups, or maybe just Brexit in general. Like maybe if Brexit had gone smoothly, there'd still be shortage because it costs that much more to move goods from the European Union to Britain now. Sort of something worth keeping an eye on. And also, by the way, it may have to do more with other things too and other global forces, including the pandemic, because I keep hearing rumors of renewed materials shortages here in the United States as well. Not so much that the consumer goods that we're after are in short supply, but that the packaging that we use to move them in our market in our particular ways is what's in short supply. Plastics and other important packaging materials which make it impossible to deliver the goods in the ways in which we're accustomed to seeing them anyway. It may be that we're in for some packaging changes in this country, and that might even be for the better environmentally, but that wasn't what it was meant to be the outcome. Anyway, so how do you like that? He chose not to use his dual citizenship to land in Britain because Brexit. Imagine, leaving Afghanistan. Well, where can you go? Well, I am a British citizen. Oh, good. So then you'll go to Britain? Are you kidding? Conditions there are crazy. I'm not going to go. You're coming from Afghanistan, sir. Yeah, but Germany is available to me. He chose Germany because he expected it to have a better economic future and a leading role in the telecom and IT sectors in the long term. But even with his background, Sadat has struggled to find a job in Germany that matched his experience. With degrees in IT and telecommunications, Sadat had hoped to find work in a related field, but with no German, his chances were slim. The language is the most important part, said Sadat. Yeah. Every day he does 4 hours of German at a language school before starting a 6-hour evening shift delivering meals for Lieferando, where he started this summer. I don't know what that is. I guess it's a meal delivery service of some kind in Germany, but I'm not familiar. The first few days were exciting but difficult, he said, describing the challenge of learning to cycle in the city traffic. The more you go out and the more you see people, the more you learn, he said, and that's always true of everything. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting article for a number of reasons, not the least of which was in the tweet that brought it to my attention from Riham Al-Kusa, who covers Germany for Reuters, but I don't think was on this article, but just noting a former minister in Afghanistan became a delivery man in Germany. While interviewing him yesterday, I guess he was involved in the story. Did she not get the byline on that? Or did I just forget the name? Oh, no, there it is. It was the second of the two names that I read. So she was interviewing him, and she says she was constantly reminded of how much a migrant loses in starting over somewhere new. And then says, I wrote part of the story here. I could have just read that part of the tweet, and then I would have known. Anyway, good point and a good reminder when Republicans make stupid assumptions about what migrants are doing and why. Okay, let's see. Other fun items to go back to domestic politics for just a minute. Greg shared this with me over Twitter direct message yesterday. Thought it might be of some interest here for us today from The Intercept. Ryan Grimm and Lee Fang teaming up on this one. Curious. I mean, I see the motivation for writing such an article. Let's see what it has to say and what's the factual basis of all this. Because this is good damnation for no labels, which we're always happy about. And I think generally inclined to believe. Interesting, though. Once again, no labels. I just can't really figure out why they feel like they need to exist. I don't know what they're trying to do, and I don't know who's supposed to believe that they really don't label things, because no labels except for labels that we want to hang on socialists and AOC, and we label them to death. But we have no labels. Anyway, this is an interesting story. No labels allegedly offered conservative Democrats, maybe the unbreakable nine, hundreds of thousands of dollars to spurn Nancy Pelosi's fundraiser. Why? What kind of play is that? Sources told The Intercept that the group dangled $200,000 in rewards before two members of Congress for a stand against the party's legislative agenda. And as they start off calling them, and this is, I guess, accurate, calling the No Labels now a dark money group, No Labels offered to raise $200,000. They didn't have it. They were going to go get it. For two of the so-called Unbreakable Nine, the House Democratic faction blocking the party's agenda this week, if they would cancel an appearance last Saturday at a Napa Valley fundraiser hosted by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Not a smart play. This, according to two congressional sources familiar with the proposal. Oh, boo. And out of the nine, one of them had to be Carolyn Bordeaux, and also the other Vicente Gonzalez of Texas. They had both been scheduled to appear at Pelosi's fundraiser, which was jointly hosted by the DCCC. Their appearance would have created awkward optics for No Labels because the group had been working to project a united front of opposition to Pelosi's legislative agenda, which hinges on a plan to hold back a vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill in order to maintain leverage over a complimentary $3.5 trillion reconciliation package. The larger package includes significant tax increases on the private equity barons and other wealthy individuals who fund No Labels, and the group has unleashed a flood of money in order to stop it. Bordeaux attended Pelosi's fundraiser. Gonzalez canceled his appearance. Absolutely no such agreement was made, says Isaac Baker, senior advisor to Gonzalez. Margaret White, executive director of No Labels, denied that there was any such offer. This is false, she said. An official with the DCCC said that despite Gonzalez's lack of attendance, his campaign will still benefit from the fundraiser. Isn't that nice? Congressman Gonzalez spent the weekend at home in McAllen, Texas, to work on safely evacuating Americans and our allies out of Afghanistan. and to monitor the urgent situation at the border and a spike in COVID-19 cases at his overwhelming local hospitals, Baker added. Bordeaux did not respond to texts or voicemail messages requesting comment, but she went. So there's that. On Tuesday afternoon, after the group secured a promise of a floor vote on the infrastructure plan by September 27th, Josh Gottheimer, the leader of the rebellion, Bordeaux, Jared Golden of Maine, Kurt Schrader of Oregon, gathered over Zoom with dozens of No Labels donors for a victory lap. Hooray! Oh man, No Labels, really, of all places to land, Carolyn. Well, we'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I don't know. I'm torn between continuing with this article and moving on to so many other things, but I can't cram them all in. But maybe it's best to benefit from the reporting here in the Intercept and try and get some idea of what people are saying to one another in the No Labels context here. I left off reading the part about a Tuesday afternoon Zoom call between some of the Unbreakable Nine, some of the others I guess broke, and No Labels donors for a victory lap. And got a recording of it here where you can hear Josh Gottheimer telling the donors, "You should feel so proud. I can't explain to you. This is the culmination of all your work. This would not have happened but for what you built," Gottheimer told them. According to the recording of the conversation obtained by The Intercept, "It just wouldn't have happened. Hard stop. You should feel just so proud. This is your win as much as it is my win." Oh, thanks very much. And by the way, they didn't really win anything, but, he's trying to tell donors that they had an important impact so that they keep donating. I can understand that. The call was led by Andrew Bursky, managing partner of Atlas Holdings, a major private equity fund in Connecticut, which operates heavily in the construction and development sectors. When it comes to their ringleader, this is about one thing and one thing only: blocking tax increases on the private equity guys who fill his campaign account, said one House source, reflecting the broadly held view among House Democrats that the effort by Gottheimer and No Labels was singularly focused on preventing tax increases on the wealthy, corporations, and tax-advantaged sectors like private equity and hedge funds. No Labels professes to value bipartisanship, but from my experience, they value B-U-Y, not B-I, but B-U-Y partisanship, said Representative Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, a former No Labels member who resigned from the group when they declined to disclose donor identities. Clearly, they want to advocate for their donors more than good government, and that means things like corporate tax breaks and the like. It may very well be that No Labels started out with something more noble in mind, but look, a good grift was found, and that's what they want to do now. The efforts by No Labels donors come as corporate groups have pushed to defeat the investments in combating inequality funded through taxes on the wealthy and certain business sectors. The finance industry has deployed dozens of lobbyists to Capitol Hill to block the infrastructure provisions centered on increasing taxes on private equity. Business Roundtable, which represents the chief executives of the largest publicly traded companies in America, has retained former Democratic staffers to fight the tax provisions. Whether the House's concessions on infrastructure amounts to a win is dubious and hotly debated on Capitol Hill, but there's no question No Labels has organized its donors to fight the taxing and spending battles of the Biden administration. In June, No Labels co-founder Nancy Jacobson, the spouse of operative Mark Penn and Mark Penn, himself a mentor to Gottheimer, was explicit in her plan to use donor money to reward members of Congress who voted the way the organization insisted, according to audio of another private meeting, which The Intercept obtained that month. Now, the truth is, there's no other group in the center that's putting the hard dollars together, Jacobson told a group of donors in the June meeting, which also included Senator Joe Manchin. The term hard dollars refers to money given directly to a candidate for federal office, which candidates find more valuable than outside spending because they have full control over their own funds, whereas super PACs make their own spending decisions. Candidates also have access to discounted television commercial rates, while outside groups pay the full freight. Jacobson noted that while many other dark money organizations put up big numbers, that's a lot of soft dollars. It's a lot of super PACs. It's things they don't control. They, members of Congress, love the hard dollars, and I would be hard-pressed to think of any other group that can raise that sort of money. Our hope is at least $20 million over the cycle with this group, and hopefully keep doubling it as we go. Well, sure, hopefully. Why not? Everybody believed that. Jacobson added that the recipients of the largesse remained to be determined. We're going to see what happens with this next vote, and we want to reward those people that, get to party solutions. Get to party solutions? She said. Well, I thought that was about no parties, but okay. By making the linkage between votes, known in the legal ethics world as among a set of official acts, and campaign funding so explicit and direct, no labels isn't just exposing members of Congress it supports to accusations of run-of-the-mill corruption, but also potentially exposing them to legal liability. Whoops. On the question of whether accepting campaign funds as a reward, quote, reward, for the right vote on the infrastructure bill would break the law, a Congressional Research Service summary explains that accepting such money could indeed be off limits if it was given because of how they voted. The prohibition on bribery precludes officials from accepting contributions in exchange for performance of an official act. The prohibition on illegal gratuities does not require that the contribution be made in exchange for the official act, but instead precludes officials from accepting contributions made because of the official act. On Tuesday, Gottheimer said that both the White House and congressional leadership had put intense pressure on the group, but the support they had from their donors was key to bucking up their strength. We got on the phone every single day for a conference call, and everyone stuck together, and they beat the crap out of us, although he uses the real word, the fun one that Gabe wants me to use. Excuse my language. Gil, I'm sorry. Thinking of my other G friend, but okay. Sorry, Gil. But yes, I know you want me to say they beat the ass out of us. I'm so close. But, I'm not a member of Congress. You could bribe me for that official act. Could you do that? Yeah. I guess if everybody gave, I don't know, what would it have to be? $100. Then that's an interesting fundraising idea. What if I once a month said there would be a subscription-only, full uncensored, show or something? Then I feel bad about depriving other people of it. That's my problem. Anyway, they beat the crap out of us. Then he says, excuse my language. See, even he's got a problem with this. They really, really were tough on us. I mean, they used every single thing, every tool they had to put pressure on us. And you know it. And they wanted us to break apart, and we wouldn't break apart, he said during the Zoom meeting. Very articulate. You had people from the DCCC threaten our members to cut them off financially. No one believes that. People threatened redistricting. People threatened primaries. That I do believe. Our own people, our own leadership. Justice Democrats, which is the squad. Yikes, wait a minute. The squad. That's right. That definitely deserves dramatic music. Are running ads against me and my colleagues in our district right now, but we fought back and you all really helped us. I don't know. I'm sure people are hinting darkly about things like redistricting, but I have my doubts about how much that comes up. Kurt Schrader, the former chair of the Blue Dog Coalition, told the group Tuesday that the so-called win gives them leverage to target the reconciliation package. Oh boy, this is a big deal. I just want to thank you guys so much for your support, having our backs, being a big part of why we are where we are today, he said. Let's deal with the reconciliation bill later. Let's pass that infrastructure package right now, and don't get your hopes up that we're going to spend trillions more of our kids' and grandkids' money that we don't really have at this point, Schrader said, unless, of course, it's on infrastructure, in which case, yes, let's spend it, because our donors get part of that money. The Oregon lawmaker went on to note that severing the traditional infrastructure vote from the broader package showed that bipartisanship is still alive and well. No, it didn't. You can build real relationships. I've talked to a lot of our Republican Congress members. It's a huge win. You've talked to them, but, you haven't gotten any cooperation from them on anything. On Monday, Pelosi and her leadership team put the screws to Gottheimer and his crew, deploying a range of threats the range that Gottheimer described later. No Labels put out an ad defending what they dubbed the Unbreakable Nine, characterizing them as heroes of our time and comparing them to the late politicians Abraham Lincoln, Margaret Chase Smith, and John McCain. That's some group. Aside from Bursky, the Tuesday evening donor call was attended by a slew of some of the country's richest people, who all stand to pay high taxes thanks to the multi-trillion-dollar legislations designed to balance spending with revenue increases on corporations and the wealthy. A variety of approaches has been floated, from raising the corporate income tax rate to increasing funding for the IRS so that the agency could pursue audits of the complex, high-end tax returns. The bill's backers also contemplate changing the structure of the tax code for private equity firms and hedge funds, whose partners currently enjoy much lower tax rates than wage earners. The call's list of attendees included billionaire Howard Marks, co-chair of Oaktree Capital Partners, Andrew Tisch of Lowe's Corporation, whose name is plastered all around New York City thanks to the Tisch family's charitable giving, Gordon Siegel, the co-founder of Crate and Barrel, now managing director of the private equity firm Prairie Management Group. They're buying the prairie, you see. We read about that not that long ago, right? Kenneth Cicciano, maybe? I don't know. Managing director of major private equity firm TA Associates, Pelican Ventures Jim Stannard, founder of Renaissance Re and former chair of Tiger Risk Partners, LLC. Tiger Risk. Jim Tozer, managing director of real estate investment firm Vectra Management Group. John Cushman, chair of global transactions at commercial real estate firm Cushman & Wakefield. Steve Fifield, head of his real estate investment firm Fifield Co. And former Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, who doesn't really do anything. The source who provided the recording acted out of disappointment that powerful donors would come together to try and sink the side of the spending effort focused on social economic inequities that we see in this nation. The broader reconciliation bill, focused on unprecedented investments in free childcare, education, and health care, represents the most transformative program in decades to alleviate poverty. Benefits that will disproportionately flow to many communities that have experienced systemic racism in the past. The source said the fact that No Labels would mobilize its strength to defeat such a groundbreaking proposal provided the motivation to share the recording with The Intercept. For every $1 investment in the early development of a child, the returns are double-digit in terms of workforce participation, healthcare, longevity, crime reduction, said the source. These No Labels donors are overwhelmingly old, rich, and white people from finance and from Wall Street, the source added, noting that deficit concerns are only raised in the context of spending, not when taxes on the rich are slashed, and not even all spending, just the stuff they don't like. They don't mind the tax cuts that they got previously, and they don't talk about pay-fors when it's a tax cut. They only care when it's a program to confront systemic racism that is embedded in the numbers in terms of poverty. Okay. Well, we're caught up and up to speed on what these people are doing. We can jump around a little bit and hit some of the other fun and interesting stories. This not necessarily a news story per se, but I am remiss at the moment in thanking Mike D., who has upped his Patreon pledge, and rather significantly at that. And I don't know whether it's a one-time thing or going on for a while, but whatever it is, we acknowledge it and say thanks and appreciate it. Mike D., which is my only identification of you. which is fine. You don't need to reveal anything further. Perhaps you know who you are. Perhaps your name is Mike D, though, and you haven't increased your pledge on Patreon lately. Well, don't make me a liar. You should go and do it too. Now, what if your name is not Mike D? Same thing applies, basically. All people with names, and even those without, if there are any, should head over to patreon.com/KagroX, as a matter of fact. Easy enough to find. If you are not currently donating but have been listening to the show, maybe now's the time to join in. If you are currently donating and this show is better than any other one, this episode than any other you've ever heard, well then, by all means, I invite you to increase your participation in all of that. I don't really like to pressure people to do that because you're already on board, and I appreciate it. But, you know, if you figure out that you love us a lot more than you thought you did when you first began to participate as a donor, well, who am I to stop you? Okay, now let's see. Other things here. Oh, that made me close Pocket, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. Let's jump on over there and see what else we need to bring you up to speed on. How about, let's see, there's a couple of small-ish stories. I'm just scanning here. A couple of things we really do need to catch up on. But we'll try this one because it is user contribution here. Now, who sent me this one? Was it... Let me go back into my email and see if I can't figure that out. Because I've had a couple of contributions in terms of the show sent my way of late. Was it? And I want to get it correct here. And yeah, here we are. Our friend who we identify on the air these days as Dave R, since that's how he emails us, who's been conversing with us on a couple of issues, but also sent along this article. Perhaps we can share it in our closing minutes here. But, oh yes, right, something that, did you send this, did I acknowledge this on the air? At some point we were talking about the weird anomaly of Alabama in the COVID-19 statistics. And they are a real anomaly, and that they are slowly but steadily creeping up in the ranks of states among the most infected in the country, but still, day to day, puts up numbers that puts them, very often qualifies them for being among the top 10 in terms of the lowest, the smallest increase in daily new cases each day. They must have just had some blockbuster early days. So it's really kind of odd, but very often when I put up those maps each day about the states that have the most increase in new cases per capita each day, it's the solid deep South, but very often, if not almost always, Alabama is a cutout in that. I mean, they're surrounded, and I'm curious as to what it is that they're doing, except that on the cumulative numbers are no better than the rest of the South. So I'm a little puzzled as to what's going on there. But he had pointed out to me in email that, well, it's interesting. Alabama has that strange concentration of highly educated, space scientists and rocket scientists because of the Space Operations Center there, which was also then a few days later relevant to the story we had about the relocation of Space Command to Alabama, which, wasn't out of the blue entirely. There is a space infrastructure there. It makes some sense to land Space Command there. But then Donald Trump mouthing off that he had single-handedly steered that to Alabama, which would belie the Air Force's discussion about it having actually been a competitive process that Alabama won out in. And that may still be true. Trump could just still be lying, but it creates some significant legal liabilities, and he's a stupid idiot. Anyway, that wasn't what Dave R. was emailing me about. He sent me this article, worthy of sharing, on a topic that we spend far too little time on here, given its importance, but I think we gloss over it for the most part because it's the assumed agreement among our listening audience on the subject, climate change. And he has sent me this article from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, always among our favorite alarmists, really, but because they're scientists, we tend to believe them, but it's really something when they get to be alarmist because they're scientists. Louise Fabiani, writing here under the headline, "What, me worry? The problem with letting others deal with climate change," which is, of course, what we've been doing for the past couple of years because it's been under the Trump administration. But I guess things are changing for the better under the Biden administration, but still, global leadership on climate change has resided elsewhere for quite a while now. An editor's note here, this story was originally published by Undark. I don't know, but who that is, but there you go. It appears here as part of the Climate Desk collaboration. And let's get through it while we still have time. There has been much coverage in recent media of citizens who fail to acknowledge the existence of such global crises as COVID-19 or anthropogenic climate change. They are said to be skeptical or in denial. They refuse to participate in any solution for the simple reason that they believe them to be non-issues. Just as dangerous to the common good as a person who fully accepts the existence of a problem, yet believes as a matter of course that everything will work out just fine. They are indulging in magical thinking, a mentality marked by excessive optimism and a dash of egocentrism. Magical thinkers are content to simply sit on the sidelines and radiate good thoughts at those doing the heavy lifting to solve the world's ills. Which, I don't know, yikes, what if that's me? I mean, because I'm sitting on the sidelines radiating good thoughts, I think. I'm not doing very much in terms of activism on that front. That's true. I do the part that's available to us as regular non-activist Americans, recycling, reusing, yada, yada, all that stuff. But yeah, well, maybe this is targeted at me and not the country. Well, we'll read on and find out. Is Dave R. that subversive? Both adamant deniers and cheerful magical thinkers refuse to contribute time and energy or make personal sacrifices to solve social problems. They hold society back from tackling its most pressing threats to equity, security, and even survival. They leave others to do the worry and the work. Not only is this monumentally unfair to those who shoulder the responsibility, it wastes valuable time. No local or global crisis will disappear if everyone assumes that someone else will fix it. It is easy to understand why magical thinking's core element, optimism, I don't have that, arose as a human trait and why it persists. The alternative to belief in positive outcomes can be resignation or despair, which are both painful and limiting. It could be argued that humanity would not be where it is right now if not for legions of optimistic ancestors ignoring the local doomsayers' warnings not to cross that river or build that tower or taste that strange new berry. Whenever a bold and perhaps foolhardy pioneer managed to explore, engineer, or eat something new and live to tell the tale, human culture grew in its complexity and in its capacity for further creativity. To put it another way, had all early hominins been cautious to a fault, we may never have ventured away from our point of origin. Yet here we are in the 21st century. Billions of human beings are benefiting from millennia of cultural innovation and more than 3 centuries of Enlightenment thinking, a paradigm shift that enabled great minds to tackle age-old problems such as infectious disease. But Enlightenment thinking has also caused its share of problems, such as the release of massive amounts of carbon dioxide from combustion engines and factories. It also gave rise to, or at least reinforced, a quasi-religious belief in the power of the human mind to solve almost anything with technology, given adequate time and resources. Biologist David Ehrenfeld calls this the arrogance of humanism. It provides an easy fallback for any crisis. Not to worry, somebody will think of something. Well, sometimes we do depend on that. And here we may have to. Take the loss of global biodiversity. The denialist would say, environmentalists exaggerate the threat of extinction just to get attention. It's not a very good idea, but okay. The optimist would say, it sounds really bad, but nature is resilient and ecologists are resourceful. Why, just the other day they discovered a frog that they thought was extinct for decades. Yeah, see? I don't know why I went that direction, but I did. The magical thinker combines that optimism with a self-interest that can take root when a solution to a problem conflicts in some way with their identity or values, or simply takes too much effort and time. Smartphones use rare earth metals mined in biodiversity hotspots? Awful, the magical thinker would say. Oh, I think I'm doing this. I love gorillas. But as a busy working mom, I'm not that. I cannot give up my phone. Someone will find a safer source of metals before long. This discomforting cognitive dissonance begs to be resolved. In their 2007 book, Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. There's my book. Elliot Aronson and Carol Tavris wrote, "Dissonance is bothersome under any circumstances, but it is most painful to people when an important element of their self-concept is threatened, typically when they do something that is inconsistent with their view of themselves." We can add, or when they are called upon to do something that clashes with their self-image in some way. Given how unbearable cognitive dissonance can feel, it's hardly surprising that magical thinkers grasp at any relief available. They shut down the avenues of curiosity that could lead to deeper understanding, prematurely reassure themselves that things sound worse than they are, and place unwarranted faith in others to do any repair they acknowledge needs doing. By convincing themselves that the problem doesn't need to be fixed yet, and then only by others, they create a get-out-of-jail-free card for their consciences. As we lurch further into the Anthropocene, people comfortable with change will continue to bump up against those who aren't. How can activists, policymakers, and even ordinary citizens mitigate magical thinkers' disengagement with reality and responsibility? Shaming them does not work. We've learned a lot about that. Badgering them with more and more facts will only cause entrenchment, more elaborate magic. It's like Aesop's fable about the sun, the wind, and the cloaked traveler. No matter how hard the wind blew, it could not remove the man's cloak. In fact, it only succeeded in making him hold on more tightly. But when the sun beamed at him, the man took off his cloak voluntarily. The fable advises a soft sell augmented by persistence. The sun tried to make the man change even after witnessing the wind's failure. To spur magical thinkers into action, I would also advise anyone in a position of educating the public about an issue to avoid automatically painting an optimistic picture of possible measures as if they are almost fait accompli. Faced with dire scenarios such as those in the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it is tempting to comfort people by doing such things as enumerating successful extant green technologies like electric cars and solar panels as a way of predicting the arrival of similar solutions further down the line. It is far more effective to pair cold facts with warm hope instead of palliatives. As Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci said, "We need the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will." When a problem arises, denial and magical thinking both fail to get the job done. The best kind of hope we can give people hinges on a contingency where the need for participation is understood. We can do this if we put our heads together, find workable solutions, and then put them into play. It sees a light at the end of every tunnel, but knows we'll never get out of the darkness without the collective will to change. We did it. We did change. We made it all the way to the end of the article. I knew we could do it if we put our heads together. Thanks, Dave, for forwarding that one to us. Wake-up call. I don't know if it was intended to be a wake-up call for all of us, but we turned it into one. That's our guilty conscience working. But it'll keep us, I don't know. I was going to say keep us all honest, but that may be too much to hope for. I don't want to be too much of an optimist here. All right. I will say this. I'm optimistic about the fact that the show has come to an end and I could use a short break. And what we'll do is we'll take 48 hours of it for the weekend and come back on Monday. Let's see. Several housekeeping notes. Might as well lay it all out there. Tuesday, I said that we would be visiting again with Joan McCarter now that we know the outcome of the votes on the infrastructure package and reconciliation, etc. But in fact, I will be off the air on Tuesday to take care of that item I mentioned to you earlier, the funeral for my father-in-law, so we'll be off the air for that day. We'll see whether we're able to prepare anything. The pressures may be too much for us, but we'll see what we can do about that. And next Friday, off the air again. I'm really hitting you hard in August. August 31st, the last day of the week. The month will be next Tuesday. That's taken care of. Then a couple days later, next Friday, off the air again. Medical visit, and I guess by way of advocating for self-care, colonoscopy. If I can do it, you can do it too. Make sure you get it taken care of, just so there's no mystery involved. Now there's no mystery between us whatsoever, so that's good. We'll see you after the end of the weekend. Now, taking you into the weekend, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. He's got all the stories we have missed to date, and probably more detail on those we hit on nonetheless. Let's see. I'll scan it and tell you what's up real quick.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Look at this. You'll never believe it. He found a Republican jerk. A California GOP congresswoman voted against limiting hazardous chemicals following donations by companies using hazardous chemicals. What a surprise. And an allegory for everything we've been involved in, and similar to the no label story. Stay tuned for that and much more. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.